Luisa Neubauer believed she had found her perfect target. Keanu Reeves, the world-famous actor, the star on the screen, but supposedly politically naive, uneducated, and complacent. For weeks, Neubauer had been taking shots at him in interviews. She called him an out-of-touch millionaire who jets around the world in private planes while the planet burns. When Reeves finally agreed to come on her live show, she was sure that tonight she would dismantle him in front of millions. But what happened in the next 30 minutes left Neubauer speechless and shattered her image as the untouchable moral voice of a generation. Hello everyone, welcome to Behind the Applause. Don't forget to mention which country you are watching from in the comments. Let's get started. In the glaring studio lights, two worlds collided. The climate activist moral crusader and the quiet, disciplined artist from Hollywood. What began as a normal interview turned into the showdown of the year. Luisa sat confidently in her signature chair in a green blazer, her notes on her lap. Her production team had spent months collecting clips and quotes, statements from Reeves, paparazzi shots of his car collection, old movie contracts, flight data. They wanted to surprise him with facts and accusations. In the next room, there was even an emergency dossier, just in case Reeves performed well. What she didn't know was that on the other side of town, Reeves' small but clever team had also meticulously prepared, like for a film premiere. No agents, no publicists, but rather lawyers, data analysts, former journalists. While Neubauer's editorial team formulated attack lines, Reeves planned a counteroffensive with facts, composure, and icy precision. In Studio B, Reeves checked his microphone one last time. Calm, almost meditative, he wore a simple dark suit. No flashy statements, no populism. But beneath the elegant exterior were three carefully prepared folders. The first, Neubauer's inconsistent statements about personal carbon footprints. The second, analyses of real-world climate policy versus activism. The third, hopefully unnecessary, contained information that could end careers. The room was charged. Everyone in the studio felt it. This was no normal conversation. It was a duel, and both knew only one would emerge unscathed. The preparation had been meticulous. Keanu Reeves had not treated the conversation like an interview, but like a high-stakes meeting with political significance. His team, small but experienced, had compiled a collection of dossiers that would have made even the strategists of a federal election campaign look pale. Videos, quotes, flight statistics, charity donations, everything was meticulously archived. But that alone was not his greatest strength. What Reeves brought with him could not be trained, credibility. He knew what it meant to fight his way through a system that wasn't always kind to him, have experienced for himself what it means to earn respect on and off the screen. He had felt external arrogance often enough, and it would meet him again tonight. For Luisa Neubauer, much was at stake. Her reputation as the moral authority of the young climate movement, as the voice of a more just future, rested on her talent for rhetorically cornering opponents. For Reeves, it was the opportunity to show that people like him, quiet, disciplined, fact-based, would no longer be excluded from ideologically charged debates. The tension was palpable. Both sides had been watching each other for months, exchanging comments, provoking each other. But the real break came 2 weeks before, when Neubauer used an entire podcast to caricature Reeves as a valueless celebrity, an artist who only speaks when it's safe. Her team had edited interview snippets to make him sound simple-minded. And that was precisely what would come back to haunt her tonight. For Reeves had since not only prepared answers, but a strategy based not on defense, but on a turnaround. He had worked through Neubauer's own statements, her contradictions, her moral blind spots. But neither of them suspected that this evening would be about more than just climate or movies. It was about much more. A battle between moral arrogance and quiet integrity, between those who control narratives and those who rewrite them. 30 seconds until airtime. Both took a deep breath. The red camera light glowed. Neubauer began with the self-confidence of a woman accustomed to thousands of microphones. Good evening, I'm Luisa Neubauer, and this is The Next Generation. Our guest tonight is the actor Keanu Reeves, a man who has recently commented on topics about which he, frankly, understands little. The tone was set, passive-aggressive, condescending, aimed at provocation. On the split screen, Reeves appeared, calm, focused, almost emotionless. He had studied every episode, every conversation with Luisa, her favorite interruptions, her moral tactics, her weaknesses when the tables were turned. If you've watched this far, you're already part of this journey. Subscribe and follow along. Mr. Reeves, she began as she sorted her papers. You're an actor, not a climate expert, and yet you publicly talk about sustainability, politics, and society. What exactly qualifies you to tell the world how it should behave? A typical Neubauer opening. Direct, sharp, intended as a moral test. But Reeves didn't fall into the trap. No attempt to justify. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said calmly, Ms. Neubauer, that is not the right question. The right question is, why do people who never had to fight for recognition, who were never confronted with arrogance or ignorance, believe they have the sole right to decide on the validity of voices? Silence. Icy silence. He had not only parried, he had turned the direction directly toward her vulnerability, her moral privilege. Luisa blinked, surprised and uncharacteristically nervous. Oh, she replied, her voice now sharper. So you mean experience doesn't count? Success disqualifies you? That sounds like reverse discrimination to me. Reeves shook his head slightly. He had anticipated exactly this turn. On the contrary, he said, experience counts. That's why I'm talking, because I know what it's like to fail, to fight your way back up, because I've experienced how complex our society is, and because I believe that interviews meant only to shame and blame don't help, they only divide. The studio air grew heavy. Neubauer's editorial team in the control room saw their host in reverse gear for the first time. Reeves, the supposedly naive artist, dominated with composure and depth. Neubauer tried to change the subject. Let's talk about your movie contracts. Sustainability starts with the decisions you make, and yours look a lot like greenwashing. A trump card, she thought. But Reeves was prepared. Neubauer had believed she could score with her favorite weapon, simplifying complex issues into striking accusations. It had worked on dozens of politicians. Why not on an actor? Mr. Reeves, she began with cold precision, you support gigantic film budgets, travel the globe, preach sustainability, and yet you contribute to CO2 emissions, consumerism, and social inequality. How do you explain that to the families who have to turn every penny? In the past, this tactic would have been enough. But Reeves was not only prepared, he was consciously calm. He smiled briefly. Then came the counterattack. Precise, legally, irrefutable. Luisa, let's clearly name what we are talking about. Are you referring to the film projects where we worked with crew to implement sustainable practices? Or are you talking about the decisions I've made to not accept certain lucrative roles and endorsements because they weren't consistent with my values? Or are you talking about my silent charity work that has helped so many? She tried to interrupt. In vain, his voice became firmer. When you talk about responsibility, we should also talk about the greenwashing of NGO funding, about first-class flights to climate summits, and about how easy it is to make demands when you yourself have never had to take responsibility for real decisions. The studio grew hot. The guests, journalists, climate activists, and technicians began to look around restlessly. What was happening here? Neubauer tried another topic change. Let's talk about safety. In your industry, scandals, violence, drug abuse, harassment allegations are piling up, and yet you don't publicly comment on these problems. Why? Here too, Reeves was prepared. He pulled out his phone, typed briefly, and held it up. Since the late 90s, I have been working with organizations that support those in the entertainment industry who need help. I talk with them behind closed doors, without cameras, not on a stage. Then he put his phone down, his eyes fixed on her. The difference between us, Luisa, for you, topics are headlines. For me, they are people. The camera captured Neubauer's face, frozen, pale, her gaze flickering. A moment millions of viewers would watch in slow motion. But Reeves wasn't done yet. He leaned forward slightly, his voice deeper, firmer. You know why you really invited me, Luisa? Not for a discussion, but because it bothers you that someone like me, quiet, not academic but consistent, dares to speak up for justice. And not with slogans, but with actions. The control room panicked. A producer frantically waved, "Cut to a commercial." But Luisa didn't react. She was paralyzed. Her hand trembled slightly. As she reached for the glass of water, Reeves noticed and knew the final blow was coming. "You question my qualifications, so let's talk about yours. Do we really want to talk about your sometimes radical statements that cause head shaking even within your own movement? About your moral selectivity? About the damage polarization causes, even when it comes from the green corner?" She opened her mouth. He raised his hand. "No, I'm not finished yet." His voice now sounded like a lawyer in a courtroom. "You've built your career on playing people against each other, selling fear, assigning blame, and now you have the nerve to tell me I'm not qualified to take responsibility." Luisa Neubauer's face turned red, her lips pressed together, her fingers clawing at the pen. She was usually the one who dominated. Now she was the target, and Keanu Reeves stood like a quiet hero who had just silenced an entire arena. Slowly, Keanu Reeves reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a simple black folder, prepared for exactly this moment. The air in the studio was razor sharp. No one breathed. "Since you like to judge others so much, Luisa, let's talk about you." He opened the folder and pulled out some handwritten notes. His voice was no longer just calm. It was accusatory, almost legalistic. August 2018. You publicly mocked a film crew for not using recycled catering utensils. June 2019. You said that the only way for the film industry to truly be sustainable is to cease production for 5 years. He looked up. The camera panned to Neubauer's face. Frozen, pale, motionless. "Shall I continue?" The camera assistants had stopped breathing. Even the lights seemed to stand still. The woman who had cornered guests for years had herself become the accused, and there was no way out. "That was taken out of context," Neubauer finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. Reeves nodded and smiled, not a warm smile. A smile like a lawyer who had just gotten the decisive confession. "Out of context. There is no context in which it is acceptable to demand a global industry shut down, knowing it would cause millions to lose their jobs. There is no context that justifies such a lack of empathy for real-world consequences. And there is no context in which your polarization has helped our society." Then he leaned slightly forward, looked directly into the camera, not just at Luisa, but at millions. "What I want all viewers to understand is this. We, the new generation of people who take responsibility, will no longer be intimidated. Not by outrage culture, not by media bubbles, not by a morality that only exists in the studio." The studio was electrified. Keanu Reeves had done the seemingly impossible. He had not only taken over the conversation, he had taken over the show. Luisa Neubauer, once the overpowering figure of activism, was pale, trembling, and speechless. Her hands shook as she reached for the glass. The camera zoomed in mercilessly. "Do you want to know what really qualifies me to take responsibility?" Reeves asked quietly. "Not just my experience, but the fact that I never forgot where I came from, never forgot what it's like to feel underestimated, and what it is like to be judged by people who only know what they see on a screen." Then the final sentence, a dagger thrust that landed in all directions. "I went into the public eye to entertain people, whether they are like me or not. You went into the public eye to attack people, especially if they don't look or think like you. And that's exactly why I will win, and you will lose." Silence. 10 seconds, an eternity on television. Neubauer sat there, her mouth slightly open. No answer, no plan, just shock. "We'll be right back," she stammered. Cut to commercial. After the break, the aftermath in the control room was chaos. Producers ran around hectically. Phone calls to station chiefs in the offices. Panic. During the commercial break, Luisa Neubauer sat frozen. Reeves, on the other hand, was calm, controlled, not even wiping his brow. The makeup artist later reported that Luisa had to be completely remade up. Her forehead was glistening, her makeup running. With Keanu, there was no difference, as if it had been a completely normal evening. When they returned from the commercial, Neubauer tried to compose herself. A few half-hearted questions. Reeves answered calmly, politely, with deadly precision. The audience felt the battle was long over. "Thank you for being here, Mr. Reeves," Luisa said at the end, her voice fragile. "I thank you, Luisa. It was entertaining. Perhaps we'll do it again someday." The storm that followed. As soon as the show was over, the internet exploded. Within 30 minutes, hashtag Keanu Reeves was trending worldwide. Tweets like "Neubauer dismantled" and "New leadership culture" followed. A viral video titled "Keanu Reeves dismantles Luisa Neubauer in 20 seconds" reached 600,000 views within an hour and 17 million the next morning. Activists, politicians, celebrities, everyone posted. And for the first time, even many of Reeves' critics openly said, "I don't share his opinions, but this performance. Respect." The first viral tweet came less than 10 minutes after the broadcast. A simple video, "Keanu Reeves destroys Neubauer without a single swear word." In 2 hours, it had 200,000 likes. Within a day, over 15 million views on X alone. What surprised everyone, however, was the reaction from unexpected corners. Conservative commentators, who were usually allied with Luisa, paid their respects to Keanu. Even someone like the controversial journalist Julian Reichel wrote, "Politically miles apart, but rhetorically, Reeves was at the Matrix level tonight." Neubauer ran blindly into a rhetorical trap. The reactions of his fans were divided. Some accused him of selling out, while others simply recognized rhetorical talent. In the editorial offices of ZDF and ARD, however, chaos erupted. For years, Neubauer's brand had been built up as a moral figurehead, an untouchable icon of the young movement. Now she had fallen in her own arena against an actor. Emergency meetings were called. Rumors circulated that her format would be radically changed or even canceled. Luisa herself tried to limit the damage on X. An intense conversation with Keanu Reeves tonight. Good that we could openly discuss important topics. But the tweet looked like an accident report or an avalanche. The replies were devastating. That wasn't a conversation. It was a dismantling. If that was intense, the Titanic was a warm bath. Meanwhile, a very different tone came from politics. The president of the Bundestag published a statement. What Keanu Reeves showed tonight was not political calculation, but democratic dignity. Clear arguments, a calm tone, an unshakable stance. That is what we need today. But the strongest echo came from the people themselves. Donation platforms reported record figures. In less than 48 hours, Reeves had raised more support than in the 6 months prior. People who had never donated before transferred small amounts, often with the note, "For dignity and clarity for people who don't need a stage to show their stance." Even among conservative citizens, sympathy for Reeves rose. In focus groups, many said, "I don't agree with him, but he has a spine, and I miss that." Long-term consequences were not long in coming. TV editorial teams reported that suddenly, significantly more SPD and Green politicians were willing to go on critical talk shows. Reeves had shown that you can hold your own, you can even win without bending. Journalism schools analyzed the interview in seminars. How could a format that relied on provocation implode so spectacularly? Media ethicists warned that Neubauer's style had always been more about staging than information. Reeves had exposed this lesson. A new generation, a new debate. The interview particularly sparked a heated discussion about representation in media and politics. For years, it was thought that those who aren't loud, who don't appear populist, have no chance. Keanu Reeves disproved that. He was quiet, fact-based, grounded, and yet impactful. He was invited to conferences, forums, even as a keynote speaker at international events on democratic culture. Universities asked him for guest lectures on how to debate with decency and rhetoric in times of polarization. Even law schools began to use his performance as a case study on how to negotiate, attack, and defend without losing your composure. International echo, the BBC reported, "An actor beats an activist, not with aggression, but with composure." Le Monde wrote, "Reeves represents a new European leadership figure, quiet, factual, incorruptible." And Der Spiegel titled its article, "From the Actor to the Advocate." How Keanu Reeves changed the discourse. Epilogue of a turning point. What was planned as a media duel ended as a new chapter in German political culture. Keanu Reeves was not a politician, and that is precisely what made him credible. He didn't come to please, he came to speak. A week after the broadcast, he wrote on X, "Many asked if I was nervous. No, I was prepared, and that's the difference." And a young viewer commented below, "You didn't just talk, Mr. Reeves, you made history." The first tweet to go viral had over 200,000 likes in 2 hours. But even more astonishing was where the praise suddenly came from. Even conservative voices openly paid their respects to Keanu Reeves, even though they did not share his views. Even the controversial journalist Jan Fleischauer wrote, "Politically miles apart, but rhetorically, Reeves was at Champions League level tonight." Neubauer ran into a rhetorical guillotine. The tweet triggered an angry debate among his followers. Was this a betrayal of conservative values or simply the recognition of rhetorical class? Crisis behind the scenes. At the TV station, meanwhile, it was code red. For years, Luisa Neubauer's brand had been built up as young, progressive, and dominant. Now she had been defeated in her own studio by an actor. The editorial team called emergency meetings. Rumors circulated about whether her talk format would be replaced, rebuilt, or canceled. Neubauer tried to do damage control on social media. An intense exchange with Keanu Reeves. It is important to openly discuss different perspectives. But the attempt failed miserably. The top comments under the post read, "If that was an exchange, Vesuvius was a warm bath. You weren't interviewed, you were taken apart." From politics, praise, and new hope. The political reaction was not long in coming. The president of the Bundestag released a statement. Keanu Reeves has impressively shown that composure, preparation, and tranquility can be more powerful than any outrage. A role model for political communication. But the truly decisive factor was the reaction of the population. Donation platforms reported a historic surge. In the following 48 hours, Reeves raised more support than in the 6 months before, partly from people who had never donated before. The donation notes often read simply, "For clarity, for respect, for the one who listens and responds." A jolt through the political system. The long-term consequences were not long in coming. Suddenly, significantly more SPD, Green, and left politicians were willing to appear on conservative formats. The phrase, "I am not Keanu Reeves, but I came prepared," became almost a saying. Media criticism flared up. Journalism schools analyzed the interview in seminars as a textbook example of the danger of unbalanced aggression when the guest is prepared. Media ethicists judged Neubauer's show was entertainment, not education. Reeves had exposed this staging. Representation and power rethought. Most importantly, the interview triggered a national debate about representation in public life. For decades, it was believed that anyone who is not loud, who does not come from the media bubble, and who acts quietly will be dismantled. Keanu Reeves proved the opposite. He showed that authority comes not from volume, but from substance. A new political voice. Inquiries from all over Germany followed. Universities, conferences, podiums. Everyone wanted to hear him. Political scientists began to treat his interview in seminars on how to resist attacks and how to meet dominance with dignity. Law schools invited him to speak about courtroom rhetoric in the public sphere. Worldwide attention. The interview also caused a stir internationally. The BBC titled it, "How an Actor is Changing Europe's Political Rhetoric." Le Monde wrote, "Reeves shows that the new leadership style is quiet, factual, and steadfast." Dietz cite, "What Luisa lost, Keanu won. Trust." Epilogue of a turning point. What began as a TV debate ended as a new chapter in Germany's political culture. Keanu Reeves was not a politician, and that is precisely what made him credible. He didn't come to please, he came to speak. A week later on X, he wrote, "Many asked if I was afraid. No, I had respect and preparation, and that is often enough." And a young viewer commented below, "You didn't just talk, Mr. Reeves, you wrote history. If this story moved you, if you believe it's time for a new kind of conversation culture, for clarity instead of shouting, for people who convince with composure instead of volume, then leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Here you'll find more such gripping moments that show how our society is changing and who is truly shaping it. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any episodes. What do you think of Keanu Reeves' performance? Write it in the comments and share the video with everyone who finally wants to focus on substance instead of show. Until next time, an even more shocking story is coming in the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.